Okay, everyone, welcome back. There's some great organizations tabling today. I hope you got to go take a look around, and you'll get to do that again throughout the day. And on the live stream, hello again. Welcome back. Coming up in just a second, we're going to get to our authors and podcast panel, and then following that, we'll have our scholarship winners. But first, we want everyone to know about a new website, naturalview.org. This site focuses on believers who are thinking about leaving their religious worldview and joining the neutral view of scientific understanding and critical thinking. The site's mission is to be a resource for people reevaluating or deconstructing their faiths, and it's full of great podcasts and other resources as well. You can check out their table today here or visit naturalview.org to learn more. I know I just said or, but really you could say and. You could check out the table and visit their website. So let's all thank the sponsors as well one more time. The Brights, the Center for Inquiry West, and Sacramento's Atheists and Other Freethinkers. Thank you. And speaking of great podcasts, it was a great transition for myself, and other resources. Join me in giving a warm welcome here to our panelists of wonderful authors and podcasters. We're here to share some stories with you and answer your questions. So we've got Mark Kernes, Mark Kernes, J. Scott Coatsworth, Lydia Smith. Sorry, your name's not on our list. Thomas Smith. Great. And then myself, of course, I'm on the panel of podcasters, I guess. Trace Dominguez. And, of course, to moderate our panel is, like I just said, Thomas Smith. He's from the excellent podcast Serious Inquiries Only. Sorry about that. And Opening Arguments. Thomas's podcasts are about science, politics, and philosophy, and even a little bit about parenting. So, Thomas, take it away.
Well, I was going to try.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and give you this.
Oh, I love it.
There you go.
Thanks so much, Trace. Yeah, hello everybody. How's it going? Happy Freethought Day to you. Peace be upon. I don't know. Yeah, so I'm excited to be back again and talk with some interesting folks today. Try as I might, I am trying to find a through line of everybody here. I don't know. We've got we got podcasts, sure, podcasts and authors, but so many diverse topics that I think I'm looking forward to just. Maybe we'll kind of introduce ourselves and get to talking, and then we can find the through line because there's a lot of varied interests here. I can't wait. Well, who wants to start? Who wants to start with an introduction to you and your work? Shall we go maybe from the far side there?
Okay. Hello. My name is Mark Kernes. For 35 years, I was the legal editor at a magazine called Adult Video News, which is referred to within the porn industry as the Bible of the porn industry. And my particular interest was the law as it regards porn, because before that I used to be a court reporter, so I learned a lot about the law there. And so I started writing about that for the magazine, known best as just AVN. And what I realized was eventually was how much religion affects sexuality. For instance, I see everyone here is dressed. Why? It's very hot out there. But the reason you're dressed is religion, because if you weren't dressed, the cops would come and bust you, unless you were at a place where it's particularly allowed, like a nudist colony. So, so these are, and for instance, how many people here have hurled an insult at someone, which was "fuck you"? What? But fucking
me. I'll say nobody else is gonna say me. I've definitely done that
okay,
lots of
there
times.
You go. So the question is why? Because fucking is fun. Shouldn't it be unfuck you? The famous psychologist Dr. Albert Ellis certainly thought so, because he wrote about it in the magazine The Realist back in the early 60s. So religion, it turns out, affects just about everything having to do with sexuality. And that kind of bothers me, because I think sex should be free and enjoyable, between people who want to do it. And which, oddly enough, describes the porn industry, which is what I say I've worked in for a very long time. You're going to cut me off when you're when I
Oh,
right?
absolutely not. I'm
Okay.
trusting you to cut yourself off. No.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
Okay, I'm cutting you off. Stop talking. No, I don't know. Do you want?
Anyway, so I wrote this book, Preachers versus Porn, Exposing Christianity's War on Sex, spelled SEXXX, because it's about porn, a lot of it. I have gone to, for instance, I went to an anti-porn conference which was put on by some very, very religious people in Kentucky in the year 2000. I've also gone to conservative political action conferences in D.C. And also the Value Voters Summit, all of which are they're conservative politically, but they're also all anti-porn. And these are people who propose the weirdest laws. For instance, there was a law that the Free Speech Coalition, which is the trade association for the adult industry, fought against in the late 80s, late 90s or early 2000s, and it was a law which criminalized any depiction of young people participating in sexual activity. So it didn't matter if it was animated, cartoons. It didn't matter if it was, simply people who looked young. If you looked young, you could have been busted under this law. Fortunately, the Free Speech Coalition got it taken care of, and so you can still watch porn today. Let me see, what else have we got here? Because what people don't seem to understand is sex is the single most important human activity, because without it, there are no humans. So it certainly makes sense to celebrate sex. It certainly makes sense to show other people how to do sex maybe more enjoyably. And, and these are all the things that Christianity is against. They're worried about young kids like 11 or 12 years old seeing people having sex on the internet or, a DVD or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with kids seeing other people having sex. What is wrong is when their parents are too dumb or too hung up to explain to the kids what they've just seen and why they might not want to do it for a few years yet. But the point being that most parents, I don't know if I can say most parents, but certainly most religious parents, just get all crazy if they think their kid has seen some porn, in part because their own thoughts, about sex are so tied up in their religion that they can't look at it rationally.
All right, well, we can leave some porn talk for later. Don't worry. We can.
Sounds good.
And I would also like to assure you that you don't need religion to not want to see my pasty skin without my shirt on, so that requires no religion to want me to cover up. So, Scott, if you don't mind, take it away.
Okay, well, you kind of stole my line there. I was just going to say I've reached an age where I don't think anybody here wants to see me without clothing, so...
Amen. Well, we can start a new religion that's about that.
There we go. So I am a sci-fi fantasy author from here in Sacramento. I write mostly hope punk, hopeful sci-fi. I run a company with my husband Mark here called Otherworlds Inc., and we just recently published Transform the World, which is a bunch of stories about how we might change the culture, the government, the society in a way that makes it better, and they all have pretty much happy endings. So I will go ahead and pass it on to you.
Hi there, my name is Lydia Smith. I am a podcaster. This is a recent career change for me, actually. Prior to podcasting, I was working for state government, but decided to make the switch over with our newest project with my husband, Thomas Smith, called Where There's Woke. And it's a podcast where we debunk all the anti-woke conspiracy theories. We did a fun episode about the woke are coming for your pizza ovens in New York City and debunked that. But what really kicked it off was the naming controversy around the James Webb Space Telescope, which we refer to as the Jelloscope-Welloscope Space Telescope. Because
in our household. Yeah.
In our household, yeah, throughout time. So we really focus on what are these stories, what misinformation is coming from them, and what actually is going on, what's behind, what's the story behind the story, and hopefully trying to correct some of those wrong beliefs and change some hearts and minds along the way.
And then, hello, I'm Trace Dominguez. You've seen me around. I'm a science communicator. I have a podcast called That's Absurd, Please Elaborate, where we take silly questions from our audience, and we answer them with science. So we got a 5-year-old who asked how long it would take to build a Lego replica of the sun. That was a very fun question to answer because we only make a few billion Lego pieces a year, so it would take like longer than the age of the universe to construct that. But it was very fun to kind of dig into the science behind it. And so the reason I mentioned in my remarks the history of pizza is someone asked why people don't like pineapple on pizza, which was really a question about why different people taste different things in different ways. So it's really fun podcast. It's myself and another science communicator, Julian Huguet, and we have a really nice time.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah, I think maybe one through line is obviously religion and kind of the closed-mindedness that can often come with that, taking away really fun things, I guess. I want to ask Scott, in your efforts to, as you put in your bio, to actually put queer characters into things, which is a change from, the mainstream, I guess. Have you ever run into protests, people being angry at you for, putting people who are in the world every day into your stories?
No, I haven't. I kind of wish I had because it'd sell more copies.
So should I tell some of them about your work?
Please. There you go. No, I've thought about sending Governor DeSantis a copy. For me, I take a kind of nuanced view of it because religion is one of the things that exists in the world, and it has been badly misused. It's caused a lot of terrible things in this world. I've also got some friends who are very religious who are some of the most wonderful people I know. So I don't include a lot of religion in my stories, and where I do, I tend to leave it more up as a question, a more kind of agnostic thing of like, maybe there's something out there, maybe there's some things we don't understand about the universe yet. But I don't feel like I'm at the pay grade to figure that out, so I kind of more just pose a question. But yeah, I've never had a problem with the characters in the stories in terms of being banned or anything. I have had a few people that reviewed it and just said, oh, gay characters, yuck. But I don't know if that came from a place of religion or just, so.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Maybe I will tell some of those groups about, so they can get protesting. No, because I mean, you see, even today, what was it? Was it Little Mermaid where, they make like a black character and they're like, hey, mermaids aren't black. And you're like, I don't think scientists know that or not. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't they be? Is there some reason?
Well, Jesus...
Yeah.
Jesus, Santa, and mermaids are all white. We've established this, I think.
It's this feeling that people need their stories to be the way they've always been or something. And I was interested in how you've kind of bucked that trend in your work. I mean, are there examples in when you were just a fan of sci-fi and reading where you thought like, hey, it would be nice if there was, a little diversity in this story, or could you talk about that at all?
Well, at risk of dating myself, I graduated from high school in '86, and there just weren't a lot of gay characters. There were a handful. There were a few that I read at the time, but there just wasn't much out there. Anne McCaffrey, who's one of my favorite writers, had her Green Dragon writers, which were gay, but you kind of only got little side things about that. You never really got a full-on character. So yeah, there was a real hunger for me growing up to see those characters in sci-fi, and there's a lot more of it now. I mean, you can find tons of fantastic sci-fi authors that deal with those characters, but it was a long time coming. So, yeah, I think when you're a kid, even if you don't see the kind of abuse for being gay or hear people talk to you about being gay, just the absence of it can be as hurtful. It's hard. Because when I was growing up, there wasn't much of anything out there. So it was a long time before I could kind of figure out who I was and then figure out how to kind of relate to the world. So.
Have you heard from people who have said, hey, that representation that I read in your story really mattered to me, really made a difference to see me represented?
Yeah, I get that. What I get a lot, my characters just tend to be who they are. We went through this period in the LGBT community, especially the gay writing community, where it was all about coming out. And then there was a period where it was all about HIV and AIDS. But a lot of people just want to see themselves in the story and not have to deal with the trauma, like we're talking about the trauma people go through. They just want to see people just being themselves in the story. And so that's kind of how I represent it, and a lot of people appreciate that.
So Lydia, I'm a big fan of your work.
You don't say.
Yeah. I was wondering if you might want to talk a little bit about what you teased about the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yes.
Yeah, just to clarify, we are huge fans of the telescope itself and the science that it represents, but
We wish it had a different name.
yeah, not big fans of the name. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, kind of what kicked off the premise of the show completely was an episode of the Daily podcast that came out where they were talking about, James Webb and his role in the lavender scare, and some group of people were really blowing it up and blowing it out of proportion and started going after, a black astrophysicist who said that, James Webb had no relationship in the lavender scare. And sort of the controversy around that, making it seem like there was nothing there. And this is a platform that reaches a lot of people. The Daily is one of the most listened to podcasts. And at face value, you take that information and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, this is really blown out of proportion. Why is that group of people getting so upset about the name of this telescope? James Webb had nothing to do with anything, et cetera, et cetera. And you felt, you're like, I think there's something missing here. And so we went on this very long journey where we each kind of dove in head first and ended up in, I don't know, just a black hole of information, looking at stuff about, what history told us. We looked into FOIA'd emails that came out of NASA, kind of talking about how NASA was communicating about this controversy in real time with each other. We actually did our first FOIA request ourselves to kind of get some additional answers from that we received, and we're getting ready to do an episode on that to release some more information that we found out from there. We looked into the naming policies that NASA has on their books, their policy and administrative manuals, and just found that what was presented in the Daily and what was presented in the article that kicked it off from a reporter named Michael Powell, who's now moved to the Atlantic, was really misleading, and no one was there to call any of it out. No one was there to fact check anything, surprisingly, out of the New York Times. And it was concerning, and knowing that Michael Powell in particular, was doing this sort of thing with other articles as well, and now we're following him over to the Atlantic to see what he's going to be up to next.
So I might chime in, take the
Sure.
opportunity as take some panelist time here to echo some of those things. I know it's hard to distill countless dozens of hours of podcast into a quick blurb, but just to fill in some of the info there. Yeah, James Webb, which of course it's listed in the program, the James Webb Space Telescope, as one of the scientific achievements of the year, I suppose, and it is. It's remarkable. It's one of the greatest, largest scientific endeavors in human history. It might be the largest. It's incredible, and it's named after someone who many people believe it shouldn't be named after. He was the director of NASA. He's an administrator. No telescope has ever been named after an administrator before. You might think of some of the telescopes you've heard of, and they're not likely to be just named after a bureaucrat.
Scientists.
Yeah, they're usually
People
named
who
after
discovered things.
people who discovered something.
Yeah.
And so a lot of queer scientists, queer people at NASA, people who have marginalized identities, have felt like this wouldn't represent them. And one thing you might not think about with something like the James Webb Space Telescope is how often that name will be referenced in work, in studies, in people all over the world will be using this data set, and they will have to reference the James Webb Space Telescope in what they're doing. And so it was something that a lot of people cared a lot about. And I think the thing I wanted to add on to what you were saying is one thing we can't ever forget about science is that the people doing it are still very much human. The people at NASA are more human than we would have hoped, unfortunately. Because as Lydia referenced, there's a trove of FOIA'd emails because you or I or anybody, and Lydia and I have, because they work for our government, we can, Freedom of Information Act, request things like the emails related to this controversy. And what we discovered was a lot of people who took this status quo, which was handed to us. If you want to know why the telescope was named after James Webb, it's because some guy during the Bush administration in like 2003? Something like that, just decided it should be. And that person was also an administrator and thought, you know who's really cool? Administrators. We should name telescopes after them. And despite this fact, despite that this decision is meaningless, it wasn't done with any procedure. It actually violated their own procedure, though nobody seems to care about that. People defended this status quo as though it was this sacred thing, and that's something we see a lot. You know, people really want to defend what is familiar to them, even though they just heard about it yesterday. You know, it is really shocking how that happens, and I just want to emphasize how much we've learned that the people at NASA, the people doing science, are really not immune from bias. None of us are. There's no such thing as being completely neutral. We all have our biases, and keeping those people in check and making sure they, you know, are subject to criticism and are willing to change is very important. And that was a disappointing chapter. And in the end, after all this controversy, all this effort by these different groups, reports that were allegedly being done, investigations allegedly being done, before any of that was finished, the administrator of NASA, Bill Nelson, just decided, nah, we're keeping it, and just issued a one-sentence press release to, I think, 3, 4, 5 journalistic outlets who had requested information about it in kind of the dead of night, and that was the end of it. And it's a really disappointing chapter, but we learned a lot, not all of it good, but also a lot of it very fascinating about the lavender purge and what people had to go through at the State Department and elsewhere in our government in the 50s if they were at all perceived as in any way not straight. They were often kicked out of their job. Some of them committed suicide because of this. It's a very serious thing, and to see people not take it seriously was very disappointing. So with that said, Trace, I'll hand it over to you.
I just wanted to chime in on that
sure.
a little bit, because I think you were mentioning earlier what the through line is, and I feel like the through line then goes through what Scott was saying, which is it's almost like the representation matters for the status quo. If you have people represented within the status quo who are maybe neurodivergent, who have various sexual orientations, various genders, various religious backgrounds or non-religious backgrounds, all of those things, then if people want the status quo to be maintained, include all of those things. Like, if we have them in the status quo already, then people will fight to continue to include them. Right now, we don't necessarily have them in the status quo, so people are fighting to continue to keep them excluded. And so the part of what I think you're doing and what Scott is doing, and also what Mark is doing, is saying, hey, let's include these things in the status quo so that we can all fight for their inclusion in the future.
All right, well, now transition over to, let's see.
And then I make a podcast where we answer silly questions. So,
So what's the yeah. I was going to say, what's the through line to you in that? Is there anything in your work where that resonates for you?
I think for me, we try and answer questions that are ridiculous. Because, similar to what I said in my remarks earlier, this is something that I've recently, in the last few years, come to really love, is that if we don't know something, that doesn't mean that it's bad, it's wrong, it's whatever. You know, we need to go and look into it anyway. And so we get these questions we have a fairly small audience. We've only had about 15 episodes so far, but we have like 100 questions from people already. And some of them, they were clearly high. And some of them...
Hey, those could be the best ones, right?
Some of those are really good. One was one that we haven't done yet.
Like,
we're
why
not...
do we wear clothes?
Look, it's legal, Mark. Do what you want. We got one that says, what would it feel like to be music? And I'm like, I've been a science communicator for 10 years. I don't think I know how to answer that question. But it's fun because it helps us think about the world in a different way. We're basically adding that different perspective of all these different people and what they think. Because having been a science communicator for a long time, and I imagine y'all would echo, once you get into your little community of people who think the way that you think, it's not that you're stuck there, but that's your place. That's where you're starting, and that's your status quo, I guess. So it's nice to just bring in the audience and have them ask these questions that, like, what would it feel like to be music? I don't know. Like, I have to go and find somebody who can help us answer that now. And I think just by having it posed, they are all equally valuable to us. So we try and I did one the other day. What if horses were apex predators? It's like, I don't know. The farm would be a weird place. all the little kids' books of farming would be really interesting. So it's just like you never know what people are going to come up with, and I think that's really awesome because it just adds that variety, that little spice of life.
Thomas and I were listening to your remarks earlier, Trace, and something that we reflected on was just the immense responsibility that folks have because people don't know, but they have a phone in their pocket, and they'll go look it up themselves, and they'll find something wrong, perhaps. Yeah, and it's something that I think is really concerning. I was reading a study recently, actually, about science misinformation and how hard it is to change somebody's mind. It's basically impossible. Once someone has decided something, particularly in scientific disciplines, they will not change their mind about that. And I think we've seen that, through the COVID pandemic and everything. So I just want to highlight, if you have that platform, you have that opportunity to reach out to people if they don't know something and they're asking you those questions, to really do the best that you can to provide them accurate information and prevent potentially that slide into misinformation, because it's really hard to get people back.
Yeah, I wanted to say one of my favorite things about this event is the emphasis on science and how everything has to be repeatable and how important it is to be making decisions based on those things. My grandfather, there you go. My grandfather worked for Goodyear. He actually got to fly in the blimp a few times, but he was a chemist, and he actually helped invent silly putty. So we were talking about this earlier. Unfortunately, didn't get the patent on it. It was for the company, so he didn't make any money on it. But he always impressed on me growing up the importance of it. He bought me a chemistry set, and I think I almost blew up the bathroom a couple times trying to mix things I shouldn't. He bought me my first computer. He bought me a magic kit. It wasn't so much about trying to make me be any particular kind of thing, but to have me have that wonder that you get with science and even with magic, and try to figure out where my place was in the world. So I think that's so important. I love what you're doing with the podcast. It's really cool.
Yeah, actually, I had more. I wanted to chime on that too, Trace, if you don't mind, because you mentioned neurodivergence too a second ago, and also in your intro you talked about not being good at trivia. And I don't know if it's my particular brand of neurodivergence, but my brain likes to outsource a lot. And so once the internet came about and all the knowledge in the entire universe is contained on something else, my brain was like, okay, I don't need to know any of that then. I'm done. I can just unload all that. But the point behind this is, I wonder if we could talk about how much science is more a process. Science isn't, contrary to what's depicted in a lot of shows and a lot of media, science is not one guy knowing about, one usually white, angry old dude for some reason. He's always really mad. I don't know why they're so mad. Yeah. One guy knowing a lot of things. It's not that. I don't know if you want to talk about it from your perspective, or apologies if you were wanting to chime in with something there too.
Not on this particular topic.
Back to porn with you. Is that what?
Well, one of the things I found fascinating is the difference between Hollywood and the porn industry. Now, in Hollywood, guess what? They make sexy movies. They make movies that apparently have two people having sex, and yet a lot of Hollywood people are very down on the porn industry because in that venue people have sex, and in Hollywood they have these special I forget exactly what they call them, but they're like people who are on the set.
Intimacy coaches.
That's exactly what it is. And and the question I have is why? Why is it so tough for a Hollywood actor to, let's say, have her breasts pressed up against the chest of someone else, be it a man or a woman, doesn't much matter. And also, earlier in my experience, I covered the set where they were making some Cinemax movies. And guess what? They were actually, some of the people on those Cinemax movies were actually having sex. They just didn't show it in the final product. So I always found that fascinating. And that's really all I had to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to push back, but I think intimacy coaches are desperately needed and are a result of a lot of the abuse that was discovered to be rampant in the industry. I mean, there's horror stories of old time. I mean, Marlon Brando, I think, literally sexually assaulted someone during the filming of a movie. And it just, back then, it seemingly did not matter, unfortunately.
and so did Ron Jeremy during the filming of a couple of movies.
And so that safety aspect, I think, is very important and is a very valuable component of that.
Well, it is, but if I can take it a step farther, the question is, why are people hung up about sex? In other words, obviously all sex should be consensual, no doubt about that. But the question is, you know, if you're in a movie which has sexual content to it, and, you know, why is it, you know, and let's assume that you're not having actual intercourse on camera, which most of them don't, but the question is, why is it a problem if someone's breasts are shown or, you know, even their entire nude body? That strikes me as being a religious problem, in the sense that, as I said earlier, religions are very much against obvious nudity. And, you know, and that's carried over to Hollywood. And frankly, that saddens me. It says to me that the porn industry is a lot more honest than Hollywood is. Yes.
And it's interesting because I actually remember quite a bit of nudity in the Bible. So it's not really from the Bible. It's from the...
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think some of the role of the intimacy coordinator on set is really to help protect women too, because often, you know, I'll just speak from personal experience doing theater. I had an experience when I was in college where I played a wife opposite a man who was much older than me. I think I was 17 at the time because I'm born in October. And so started college when I was 17. And he, you know, we had our rehearsals and everything, and then he wanted to run lines. And it was, let's practice this kiss scene over and over and over without the director there. Let's try this, let's try that. And I said no, and pushed back. But, you know, I was by myself having to do that with someone who was like 23 at the time, my first show in college. And he ended up getting like really pissy about it and like refused to act as we were blocked in the scene as a result. And so I think intimacy coordinators, obviously that's a college production, much smaller time than a Hollywood movie, but the intimacy coordinator makes sure that there is support for both actors. I mean, they're the woman, the man, the you know, non-binary folks, that they all feel supported should something occur that it makes them uncomfortable, and that whoever it is has backup on their side, someone to witness it, someone to identify what safety is and what appropriate conduct is in this place. So the focus is on the art and not being taken advantage of whoever the person is.
I should have said this earlier, but there is a mic right there, and so as we're continuing our conversation here, not to cut you off or anything, if you have a question for the panel, for anyone on the panel, please feel free to line up behind that microphone, and if not, I will continue talking about, of all things, intimacy coordinators that I didn't anticipate. Oh, go ahead.
Well, to go back a little bit further, though, in the very early days of Hollywood, in the late 1910s, 1920s, early 1930s, you had that Hollywood was an orgy. I mean, there were people in there that they had orgies every weekend. And we're talking some major stars. And even beyond that, they have, what was I going to say? Also in New York City in the 1920s, the women, for instance, who worked at the Ziegfeld Follies, they would spend their evenings at the brothels that were run by a woman named Polly Adler. There's a very good book, a biography of her called Madam, and it tells you all about how sexual early Hollywood was and New York City was. And I found that fascinating.
Believe it or not, I think I can get this back to Scott. I was going to just try. Yeah, no. Because one thing that strikes me as you're saying that, you know, about the orgies and all that, is that it is funny how much, if you just watched media from the time, you would think that the whole world or the country or whatever you want to say was just some, you know, Barbie and Ken doll, sexless existence. And I think it does actually link back to this idea of portraying humanity in its fullness, which I think is something, Scott, that you like to do with your characters, having them be real. Because I can think of a lot of real stilted old sci-fi, you know, back with just the original Star Trek. You know, the whole thing was that embrace. There was an amazing Black Mirror episode, if anyone's seen it, somewhat recently, that sort of was a good send-up of that parodied the fact that the the big romantic gesture at the end of virtually every Star Trek was just that, that kiss, that sexless kind of Captain Kirk kiss. Is that something that you put in your sci-fi, or have you have you evolved from that?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to like the Mary Tyler Moore show back in the 50s where they had their separate beds, and nobody actually lived like that, but that's how it was portrayed. And then you jump forward to just a few years ago with Sense8, which is one of my favorite sci-fi shows, and this amazing interlinked orgy scene that is just nothing short of like multicultural and beautiful.
Mark, you'd love it.
Yeah. I'm going to see it. It's awesome. I find the thing with sex in stories, sex belongs in a story just like anything else when it's going to forward the plot. And that's, I'm obviously not topping erotica. It's erotica, sex is the story. So in most of my stories, a lot of them do have some kind of sex, but it's off-page sex. I very rarely feel in what I'm writing the need to kind of put it on the page, but it is important to show that these characters do have a sexual life, that they are related to each other in that way. Because I'm a gay writer writing gay and other characters that are LGBTQ, that is important to be part of an aspect of the story. So I do try to include that wherever, again, it does actually forward the story, forward the relationship between the characters. So, there are other people that I've got friends who have written, full 5 and 10 page sex scenes. I've got a friend who did one between a demon and a centaur, and an actual sex table was required to level things.
I actually
with
do
them.
want the details with that.
Well,
yeah.
and it, like
schematics, I would say.
5 minutes of setting up the sex table. I mean, talk about foreplay. But yeah, so I mean, it's going to vary, especially when you get a little more on the romance side of things. But yeah, I think it's healthy to have that in your stories.
Well, once again, if anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to line up. But absent that, maybe I'll return to the point I was making toward you, Trace, which is this idea of science not as a trivia-esque recitation of facts, but as a process, and a process that can go wrong, but is hopefully self-correcting. I mean, I really I have enjoyed your descriptions of your show and what you're doing. It seems like the core process starts with that question and then going from there. Do you want to tell us any more about your process and kind of some of the...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been a science communicator for a long time. So I started with the Discovery Channel making YouTube videos. They did not care about us at all. I mean, they gave us money to make them, but we weren't like a priority within the company, so we could kind of do whatever we wanted. And we ended up making 3 videos a day, every day, for more than a year, with a few different hosts and producers, but they were essentially a similar idea where it was like we tried to center it on a single question and figure out what little science we could look up, if any. So like, why do we have earwax, or why do dogs spin before they poop? Or we did have, Mark would like, does size matter, was our first video to cross 1 million views. And so it was just like, because of course, and yes, we were like, well, it doesn't matter. It does matter. It depends on, any number of things. It's a personal thing. But also, it was really fun to look at the science part of it. But we also would do videos about when science didn't work, because that's just as valuable in the narrative of science. We love to say, like, oh, Einstein is the best. He knew he knew everything. You are an Einstein. You are a genius like him. And it's like, Einstein didn't know a lot of stuff. Like, if you asked Einstein about like trees, he'd be like, I don't know what an oak is. Like, he might not know all sorts of things, but we don't like to lionize people for things they don't know. But we don't know a lot of stuff, all of us. And so it's just like, it was fun to try and talk about scientists who had failed at things. Like Marie Curie is a great scientist. She also died because of the science she was doing, because she did not know it was killing her while she was doing it. And we celebrate her in part for that. That's part of her story. And her remains are kept, in a place that has to be shielded from radiation. It's just really, really interesting stuff. And there's like a whole podcast, I'm sure, somewhere about this, of just like scientists who failed at their jobs or who didn't do the scientific method well. The thing is, though, the scientific method doesn't care. Like, the point is, you ask your question, you do your hypothesis, maybe your hypothesis fails, you learned something. Like, then you go back and you do another hypothesis. Or in modern academia, maybe you like try and figure out a way to make it work anyway. So my process has always been look and see what's out there. I try and, a lot of it, what we do is desktop research. And so we end up on Google Scholar, we end up on JSTOR, we end up on places where you can get scientific papers. We call the academics. And we always Google the question we have, this good, this bad, this controversy, because you got to get out of your bubble. Otherwise, you end up just like, oh, well, I think that earwax is this, or I think that when dogs spin, they are doing it for this reason. So you want to try and figure out ways to search outside of your norm. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to do, especially when they first start doing science communication. Yeah.
So why do dogs spin?
They think it has something. Scott wanted to know, why do dogs spin? And they think that it has something to do with. I kid you not, if I'm remembering correctly, that video was almost 10 years ago. They have some magneto sensor, like a bird flying. They know which way is north,
Mecca?
so they want to poop in a specific direction. And I'm not sure why. There's also theories that maybe they're trying to hide it, like they're looking for wind to try and hide it from any predators that might be out there. So there are any number of theories, but I think the best part is I like to end most videos, or mention in most videos I make, and I've made over 1,000, the words, more research is needed. I read it in a paper, I read it in lots of different scientific papers, and that's really the answer to a lot of my questions. And some of the commenters on our YouTube channel would be like, oh, is this one of those more research is needed videos? And it's just like, yep, because we don't know it. We don't know. It was just great.
It really is so cool. My favorite thing about science, that's hard to say, but one of my favorite things is so much of of what drives it is just finding that correct question, that right question to ask at the right time. And sometimes it does sound ridiculous.
Yeah.
Why are they spinning around? What? And honestly, maybe some of them are ridiculous. But you never know until you ask, until you research it. Oh, have we found a question? Oh, okay, yeah, please.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
So my question is, who are your favorite scientists?
We do have a board for that. I just want to point out, David's going to be very happy that I pointed out, but there's a board for that as well. So you can put, any of you here can put your favorite scientist and favorite scientific achievement. It's on like one of those 4th grade science boards. And who I put on there was Mae Jemison. She's an engineer, astronaut. She led for a while the 100-Year Starship project, which I think is amazing. It's the idea that we could send a spaceship to another star within 100 years, and how we would do that. You know, they were thinking about everything from like, well, that's more than one generation of humans. Is the person who's the mission director, is their kid the mission director? Or do we have to, within this population that we send, then find another mission director?
Just
Do we
send over a
elect
bunch of
them?
nepo babies, huh?
Right, yeah. So it's like just trying to think through all of the different problems that would come from this isolated group of humans going to another star, and how they would set that up, and how we would get them there and sustain them. And so I just thought that was amazing. And I mean, Mae Jemison's an incredible person in general, but that was when I was just like, oh my God, she's amazing.
There's
Favorite
so many
science?
amazing ones to choose from. Oh, okay.
Oh, I don't know. I have to think about it. Go ahead.
So mine would be Carl Sagan, and there's a couple reasons for this. When I was a kid, the original Cosmos was on, and I love Neil deGrasse Tyson as well. But he was just this kind of honest guy that just got up there and talked astronomy. And I was convinced for a long time I wanted to be an astronomer, until I found out there was math involved. And then I switched to astronaut, and then I found out there was like lots of physical dexterity stuff involved, so I ended up being a sci-fi writer. But my mother actually literally ran into Carl Sagan one time. We were at a thing called Planet Fest, I think 81, in Pasadena, where the Voyager 2 was doing a flyby of Saturn. And we actually, with the Planetary Society, got to go and watch at JPL as the footage came in, as they were taking all the moons and things. And he was doing some kind of panel, and she was walking down the hallway, and he came out the door, and they ran into each other. And she looked at this label and saw Carl Sagan and looked up and there he is. So that's my other personal reason for liking him.
Yeah, I'd have to go with, it's picking a favorite is impossible, but along the lines of the conversation right now, I really love Richard Feynman for specifically the reason I was just talking about. The way he talked about just asking questions all day in his mind. He would just think of these questions that, again, you would just think some of them are so ridiculous, but often they reveal really fascinating things. My favorite thing is when you think of a question that, or I don't know if I ever have, but when someone thinks of a question that you think, okay, duh, that has an obvious answer, stupid question, and then you go to try to answer it and you're like, I don't actually know what the answer to that is, or if I do, I have no idea why that's the answer. And I remember Richard Feynman describing, it's been a while, but I remember in one of his videos he was talking about how he was trying to explain something in the dining hall of the institution he was at. There's some way that the light was coming off windows or something random like that. And I remember he said something to the effect that one of his colleagues was like, "Is this what you do all day? Like, is this?" He's taking significant time out of his schedule to like research something that may be completely pointless, or maybe not. Maybe it reveals another fascinating thing about quantum electrodynamics or something. So,
I'll be quick. My favorite scientist is Dr. Alfred Kinsey, who formed the Kinsey Institute, which just a few years ago released the International Encyclopedia on Human Sexuality, drawing together scientists from around the world who had studied sex and sex's effect on society. Interestingly, I have 2 articles in there on the porn industry, but he was really one of the first sex researchers, and a lot of you owe your sexual sanity, to the extent you have it, to Kinsey.
you know, just a quick thing on that. Linking back to this status quo discussion as well. In our research on James Webb, a lot of the defenders of the history there, the Lavender Purge, again, awful discrimination against gay people, queer people of different stripes. A lot of the justification often is, well, they didn't know any better. Then nobody knew any back then. That was just normal. They didn't know any better. Nobody knew anything about that. And to which I had to point out, like, no, Kinsey predates this. Like, literally, the Kinsey scale, the thing that we've all probably heard of, predates the Lavender Purge. People knew, or the information was more than available. I think it's a convenient rewrite of history to say that nobody knew any better, and therefore it's okay when people initiated horrific acts of discrimination. And it's just not true. It's another easy out. Well, did you think of favorite scientists or yet? No. She loves every science. But I'll tell you what, how about Phoebe? Our daughter Phoebe is probably my favorite scientist. Because she asks questions that are so good.
I mean, when she was like 2.5, she was like, why are the mountains in the distance blue?
Oh, that's my favorite. God, that's my favorite. She said, and she's so, you could see her face, she's like, how come when mountains get too far away, she said, they turn blue? And I was like, can you answer that? Could you guys just off the top of your head answer it? I had a guess.
While we're driving, too.
Yeah. The light scatters and different wavelengths scatter different amounts, of course. And but it's
then,
great,
have to communicate that to, a 2.5, 3-year-old in a way that, she would feel satisfied.
I have a 2-year-old. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
What's your strategy? Because what I do is I give them the full science, and I figure they'll either fall asleep or not care, or they might gather some of it. But it's so fun because you get to tell them, what do we do when we don't know something? We look it up. And it really does drive home the difference between knowing something and really knowing something. Like having access to information versus using that information. That's not something that I would just think to look up randomly. Like, how does light scattering work? All that. But when you're asking those questions and you research tied to a specific question, it reveals things that you might not have otherwise learned. And I think kids really are the best scientists. Like, honestly, just naturally, if you let them be. I think we have just about reached our time. So I want to thank the panel so much. Appreciate you. And a round of applause for the panel. What do you think?